It's easy to forget about Luxembourg. It is, after all, one of the smallest countries on the planet, surpassed in size by even the tiny US state of Rhode Island. Hemmed in between the far more populous Belgium, France, and Germany, this tiny nation of just a few 100,000 people flies under the radar. It is by no means a major tourist destination, one of the least visited nations in Europe, despite some truly breathtaking natural scenery and beautiful architecture. Why does this tiny nation exist? How did it survive for so long when so many others were gobbled up and consolidated into larger powers? How did it become one of the capitals of the European Union, home to many of its most important institutions? How did it become one of the wealthiest countries on the planet and the fastest growing country on the continent? This tiny trilingual nation, a patch of rolling hills, farms, forests, and sharp ravines that has, through the luck and accidents of history, maintained its independence, today exercises an influence far greater than you would ever know or even expect. And so I went to Luxembourg, traveled to this fascinating, influential, yet often overlooked little corner of Europe to experience it, hear its story, and share it back with you.
Luxembourg might be the most important country that people know the least about. But taking up an area nearly half the size of Rhode Island, it still managed to be a major power player in modern Europe. Historically a major coal and steel producer, today it's a huge center of banking and finance that's become the second richest country per capita in the world. And playing a major role in the founding of the EU, today its capital city is one of the Union's 4 unofficial capitals. This tiny country plays an outsized role on the world stage, has a fascinating culture and history. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host Carter. This is The Nation Explained, Luxembourg.
This video is about 2 years in the making, after a trip my brother and I took to this fascinating country 2 summers ago. I'm excited to finally share it with you. According to the Köppen climate classification, Luxembourg is located in the oceanic climate zone with warm summers, cool winters, and temperatures that rarely fluctuate much. It's a climate zone that is common in much of Western Europe and is found in neighboring countries like Germany, France, and Belgium, as well as the Netherlands, Britain, and Ireland. It's located in the Central European time zone, 1 hour past Greenwich Mean Time, and the same time zone that, across the Mediterranean, is known as West African Time. It observes daylight savings, and during it is in the same time zone as the countries in Central African Time, as daylight savings is not observed in most of the countries of Africa. Some version of the name Luxembourg has been in use in the region for over 1,000 years. It was first recorded on a deed in the year 963. A European nobleman, Count Siegfried of the Ardennes, purchased a small rock outcropping alongside a bend in the Alzette River from monks in the nearby city of Trier. The ruins of a small Roman watchtower sat on top of the rock, and locals called the tower and the rock it sat on the Little Castle. In the old High German language they spoke at the time, Luxembourg. Siegfried built a castle of his own, and kept the old name for it. A town and then city would develop around Siegfried's castle, and the surrounding lands, and would take the castle's name. Over the centuries, its name would evolve from Luxembourg to Lutzburg, Lutzelburg, Luxembourg, and eventually landing on its current form, Lutzeburg. In English, it's translated to Luxembourg, and French and German use similar names for the Grand Duchy as well. Luxembourgers, the country's native people, speak a language called Luxembourgish, but similarly, this is a translation. People from Luxembourg call themselves Luxembourger and their language Lutzeburgisch. Luxembourg's flag is a tricolor with a red, white, and blue stripe. It looks almost identical to the Dutch flag, but has a noticeably brighter shades of blue and red. The colors were taken from the coat of arms of the old House of Luxembourg, a dynasty from Luxembourg which ruled the Holy Roman Empire for over a century. This symbol, called the Red Lion, is the civil flag of the country and a popular symbol. A push in the early 2000s to make it the Grand Duchy's official national flag failed, but drummed up some support as well as controversy. A similar flag is the provincial flag of the neighboring Belgian province, also called Luxembourg. Luxembourg is tiny. It takes up just 998 square miles, or 2,586 square kilometers. This makes it the 28th smallest country in the world, smaller than Samoa but larger than Mauritius. In fact, most of the countries smaller than Luxembourg are island nations, primarily in Oceania and the Caribbean. When it comes to mainland countries, only 5 non-island nations are smaller than Luxembourg, all located in Europe: Andorra, Liechtenstein, San Marino, Monaco, and Vatican City. It is so small that it is sometimes considered to be a microstate, though that definition usually only applies to the tiniest of nations. It is not quite a city-state. The Grand Duchy does have significant rural territory, but revolves around a single city, the urban area of which makes up a large proportion of Luxembourg's land. For my American viewers, Luxembourg is even smaller, though just slightly so, than Rhode Island, the smallest of the 50 U.S. states. For my Canadian audience, it's about half the size of Prince Edward Island. Luxembourg has a fairly small population as well. It's the 33rd smallest country on the planet by population. 162 different sovereign states have more residents than it. With 681,000 residents, it has more people than Montenegro and fewer than the Solomon Islands, just surpassed by the Chinese Special Administrative Region of Macau. Stacked up against the US, it has more people than only the sparsely populated Vermont and Wyoming, and even has fewer residents than the District of Columbia. In Canada, it surpasses Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, and the 3 Canadian territories. Luxembourg has a population density of 680 people per square mile, or 261 per square kilometer, 40th in the world, similar to Jamaica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. This is a high population density, definitely among the more densely populated countries in the world, but the small nation is still less densely populated than some far larger countries like the UK, Japan, India, Pakistan, and Vietnam. Only 4 US states, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, have a higher population density than Luxembourg. Luxembourg is located in the continent of Europe, particularly in Western Europe. Germany sits to its east, France to its south, and Belgium to its west. Along with its neighbor Belgium and the Netherlands, it is one of the 3 European Low Countries and is part of a political and economic union with the 2 called Benelux, combining the beginnings of their names. Shaped like a roughly crooked triangle with a more pointed northern tip and wider south, its eastern border with Germany begins in the rural valley of the Uhr River, where it borders the German state of Rhineland-Palatinate. It follows the winding course of the river southeast until it meets the larger Sauer River, which flows in from Luxembourg. As the waters meet, the border follows the Sauer downstream. In these border regions, particularly along the rivers, a number of towns and villages lie on either side of the border. As Luxembourg and each of its neighbors lie in the Schengen area, the EU's travel union, it's easy for residents of either country to travel easily across national borders. At the town of Wasserbillig, the waters of the Sauer meet the Moselle River, which flows the opposite direction towards it from the south. There they meet and flow east into Germany. The German city of Trier, just beyond Luxembourg, sits along the river, and further downstream, in the city of Koblenz, it flows into the Rhine. Back in Luxembourg, the border continues south from Wasserbillig, now following the Moselle or Moselle upstream. Across from the town of Heimich, Germany's Rhineland-Palatinate becomes the German state of Saarland. At the small village of Schengen, along the Moselle, the border with Germany changes to a border with France, Luxembourg now lying alongside the French region of Grand Est. It is at this international tri-point that the agreement was first signed abolishing border checkpoints between Luxembourg, Belgium, France, the Netherlands, and West Germany, an agreement that has since been expanded to 24 other European countries. Just south of Schengen, the border leaves the Moselle, France sitting to the south. It slices irregularly through farms, briefly following streams, then cutting through more fields and forests roughly westward. A densely populated string of towns, such as Diedeleng, Differdange, and Esch-sur-Alzette, Luxembourg's second largest city, sit alongside the French border, across from French towns like Russange and Ardenne-le-Tiche. West of Esch-sur-Alzette, it continues cutting through fields and along a number of creeks, becoming a border with Belgium to the west, near the town of Pétain. From Pétain, the border winds north. Most of Luxembourg's border with Belgium is with a Belgian province called Luxembourg. Belgian Luxembourg was once part of the Grand Duchy, but was split off in a partition and is the country's least populous province. At the very northern tip of Luxembourg, it briefly borders the Belgian province of Liège until reaching the German border again at the Oise River. The country is administered through local municipal governments called communes. There are 100 different communes in Luxembourg, but in such a rural country, only 12 are even considered cities or towns. These range from Luxembourg City, the capital and only major city in the Grand Duchy, to Ardennes, a small town of just 1,900 people. Each of the other 88 communes comprise rural areas and the tiny villages scattered within them. For example, the commune of Vincelle on the Belgian border is home to a number of small villages, each of which share a single municipal government. The communes are then grouped together into 12 different cantons, which are mostly just used for collecting statistics and electing government representatives. The cantons don't have their own local governments. The country is made up of two main geographic regions, the Eeselijk in the north and Gutland in the south. The entirety of Luxembourg is a hilly country, dominated by rolling hills, sharp cliffs, steep canyons, and low mountains. By far the highest of the Low Countries, much of its north is part of the Ardennes, a plateau stretching into Belgium, France, and Germany. This scenic rise is covered in forests, while rivers and streams like the Oise, Zouwe, and Volts carve sheer canyons and hollows deep into the plateau, farmland lying often along the river valleys. The Luxembourgish part of the Ardennes makes up the Eeselijk, and it takes up the northern third of the country. The cantons of Clieff in the northern tip of the country, as well as Volts, Ardennes, directly to its south, and two communes in the canton of Diekrich, together lie within the Eeselijk. Only two communes, Ardennes, Luxembourg's smallest, home to 1,900 residents, and Volts, with 6,500 residents, are large enough to be considered towns. The cantons of Volts and Ardennes, which share the names of their largest communes, are the two least populous in the country. Altogether, the Eeselijk takes up nearly a third of the country's land area, but is home to just 50,000 people, just 7% of Luxembourg's population. It is rural and, relative to the rest of the country, sparsely populated, its steep terrain making settlement more challenging. Its largest population center, after all, has fewer than 7,000 people. Here, the cliffs and valleys of the Ardennes provide the Grand Duchy's most impressive natural scenery, and it's home to hiking trails, protected nature reserves, a reservoir in the Zouwe River that is the largest lake in the country, as well as Kneif, a hill on the Belgian border that is the highest point in Luxembourg. Three of the country's most famous castles, Ardennes Castle, Clieff Castle, and Borscheid Castle, each in towns and villages of the same name, are all located in the Eeselijk, as is the scenic village of Esch-sur-Zouwe, on a bend in the canyon of the Zouwe River. In this steep countryside, villages often cling to hillsides, cliff tops, or hug canyon floors, creating some stunning scenery. The southern two-thirds of the Grand Duchy is known as the Gutland, meaning the good country. Easier to settle, it's home to 93% of Luxembourg's population. It includes most of the canton of Diekrich, as well as the centrally located cantons of Reden, Miesch, Eestenach, and Grevenmacher, and the southern cantons of Capellen, Heimisch, and the country's two most populous, Luxembourg and Esch-sur-Alzette. Though lower and flatter than the Eeselijk, this region in the foothills of the Ardennes is still hilly, though not as steep and forested as the lands to the north. The Gutland, too, can be divided into a number of different regions. The Mullertal sits in the east-central part of the country and is home to 31,000 people, meaning Miller's Valley, the hilly, rocky, cave-lined valley that runs through it, has been designated a global geopark by UNESCO, and the region itself is sometimes nicknamed Little Switzerland. Only one commune in the Mullertal, called Eestenach, is considered a town, and it's the oldest in the entire country. South of the Mullertal, along the rest of the Grand Duchy's German border, sits the Mosellerland, or Moselle. This region, the valley of the Moselle River, is home to 44,000 people. This sunny river valley has, since the Roman Empire ruled over the country, been a wine-growing region, and it's where most of Luxembourgish wines, typically dry and sparkling white wines, are produced. The Moselle is home to two Luxembourgish towns, Grevenmacher and Rhemisch. The very south of Luxembourg is the most populous and highest density part of the country. Nearly 60% of the country's population lives in just 2 southern cantons out of 12 total in the country. In its southwestern corner, along the French and Belgian borders, the canton of Esch-sur-Alzette is the second most populous in the country, home to 195,000 people, or 28% of Luxembourg's population. This densely populated border region, known as the Minette or Little Mine, is sometimes referred to as the land of red rocks. These red rocks are the iron ore that the soil around Esch-sur-Alzette is rich with, and it transformed the once rural region into an industrial center of steel production, home to one of the largest steel companies on the planet. Today, 4 communes in the Redlands are considered towns: Chomeleng and the 4th, 3rd, and 2nd largest towns in the country, respectively, Dideleng, Differdange, and Esch-sur-Alzette. The canton of Esch-sur-Alzette, which they are all a part of, has little competition for its status as the country's 2nd largest. It's home to more than 3 times as many people as the 3rd most populous canton in Luxembourg. Esch-sur-Alzette, or just Esch, the Grand Duchy's 2nd largest city, is home to 33,000 residents, and as well as a center of the steel industry, the city on the French border is a college town, home to the country's only public university, the University of Luxembourg. The Alzette River, from which it takes its name, is one of the country's most important. Beginning just across the border in France, it flows through the city, continues through Luxembourg City, and heads north, its waters eventually meeting the Saale and from there the Moselle. Just northeast of this industrial center, only a 25-minute drive from Esch, is the place from which the country takes its name, Luxembourg City. With 115,000 residents, Luxembourg City is by far the largest in the country. In fact, each of the country's 11 other cities and towns combined are barely home to more people than Luxembourg City. The capital is also surrounded by a number of suburbs. Smaller towns like Stralsund, Bachtrang, Valfa, and Stesel abut the city along the country's major thoroughfares. Altogether, the canton of Luxembourg, though parts of it are still rural, contains the city and most of its suburbs, and its population is a pretty good estimate for that of Greater Luxembourg City. With 210,000 residents, it surpasses the canton of Esch-sur-Alzette as the Grand Duchy's most populous national subdivision. This means that 30% of the country's residents live either within or just outside of its capital city. Despite being so dominant within the Grand Duchy, Luxembourg City is still a small city. In fact, there are 14 other cities in the Low Countries, that's Luxembourg alongside Belgium and the Netherlands, that have more people than it. For my American viewers, that's about the same size as the Olympia, Washington, or Gainesville, Florida urban areas. For my Canadians, it's about as large as Regina or St. John's. This small city, though, is the cultural and political heart of the country, the center of its prominent banking sector, and one of the 3 de facto secondary capitals of the European Union. European history can be complicated, a story of empires, dynasties, and wars of religion stretching back thousands of years. Because of this, I'm going to avoid getting too into the weeds on the Grand Duchy's history. We won't discuss every single ruling power or royal house that has ever laid claim to Luxembourg, but we'll focus instead on the key moments in this nation's story. The country exists as a remnant of this European past. Its unique status as a Grand Duchy is a callback to this Europe of dukes, counts, and other local rulers exercising power within a complex political system through which territory was controlled. Its language, Luxembourgish, though today a unique speck on the language map of Europe, would have once too been far from unusual in the region. The country that we now know as Germany had for most of its history been a collection of small city-states that spoke related, though not identical, German dialects. Luxembourgish was essentially the same as Moselle Franconian, a Germanic language spoken throughout the Moselle Valley. It was only with the unification of many of these small countries into Germany that a standardized German language became more commonplace. Luxembourg, which remained politically separate, maintained a tongue distinct from this standard German, and the two, though similar, became clearly distinct languages. How did these people living in this region then come to call their language Luxembourgish, themselves Luxembourgers? Our story begins with the Roman Empire. As the Romans pushed north, they conquered Gaul, the homeland of a tribal Celtic people known as the Gauls. Romans then colonized Gaul, turning it into a number of Roman provinces, building Roman cities, and resettling Roman settlers in its lands. After the empire's fall, a Germanic people known as the Franks moved in, taking control of much of the region. By the year 963, when our story begins, the people living in what is today Luxembourg were descended from a mix of all three of those peoples, the Gauls, Romans, and Franks. They spoke a language influenced by the language of the Franks that would eventually become Luxembourgish. Life for this rural region revolved around the nearby city of Trier, founded by the Romans as Augusta Treverorum, and this stretch of the Ardennes was very much within the city's cultural and economic orbit. Politically, it lay within the Holy Roman Empire, a loose confederation of small kingdoms ruled by local rulers. The empire was very decentralized. The emperor was at times elected, their primary role mediating disputes, while the local rulers had significant autonomy. One of these local rulers, the Count of the Ardennes, was named Siegfried. Siegfried had inherited relatively little land from his father. Most had gone instead to his older brothers, and he hoped to expand his holdings. In the year 963, he went to Trier, to an abbey called St. Maximin. There he traded with the monks some land he owned in the area for a piece of property that he particularly wanted, a sheer, rocky cliff overlooking a bend in the Alzette River. The ruins of a Roman watchtower sat on top, and the locals called it Luxembourg, the Little Castle. Siegfried hoped to build a real castle for himself, and this tall rock was prime real estate. With its steep approach and cliffs on every side, it would be nearly impossible to attack. Siegfried called his castle Luxembourg as well, a name that would evolve to Luxembourg, and his descendants too would call themselves the Counts of Luxembourg. The rock it takes its name from would become known as the Bock. Roads made their way to the castle and merchants set up shop outside its walls. Luxembourg was now a small town, and would grow over time along the tops of the cliffs and down into the valley floor, but its growth would be very slow. The County of Luxembourg, as territory controlled by a count is called, would remain protected by this strategic military fortification, and Luxembourg City around its walls would benefit from the castle's secure defenses. New dynasties would come into power, but Luxembourg would remain well defended. Their counts would continue to expand their territory, and were growing increasingly more powerful within the Holy Roman Empire. In 1308, the Count of Luxembourg, Henry VII, was elected Holy Roman Emperor, and with a few interruptions, for over a century, many of his descendants would also be elected emperor, a dynasty known as the House of Luxembourg. Under their rule, Luxembourg was upgraded from a county to a duchy, their rulers now with the more prestigious title of Duke. In the 1400s, control of Luxembourg through strategic marriages made its way to the powerful Habsburg family, who had come to control large chunks of Europe. It remained in control of the Habsburg dynasties, first the Spanish, then the Austrian line of the family, for centuries, but actual governance of the duchy continued to be local. Luxembourg City was small, home to just around 7,000 people, and most of the duchy was agricultural lands or forests, farmed and inhabited typically by poor peasants. A class system ruled, where peasants were trapped in serfdom. Near the edge of where Habsburg rule met their rival France, it was invaded and occupied a number of times by the French, and each side continued to beef up the strategic city's defenses, which were so formidable the clifftop city had been nicknamed the Gibraltar of the North. Despite all these geopolitical changes, life for peasant Luxembourgers had remained fairly similar throughout the centuries, and for the most part, it had remained a small Habsburg duchy, part of the increasingly weak Holy Roman Empire. But in 1795, that was all about to change. Not far away, revolution had swept France. Feeling threatened by this anti-monarchy revolt, the German kingdom of Prussia invaded France, but the French pushed them out, and during it all, marched in and conquered the unconquerable duchy. Serfdom was abolished. Luxembourgish peasants declared equal French citizens. It was governed as the so-called Department of the Forests. But revolutionary France would eventually fall into chaos, and out of it would rise the empire of Napoleon. Napoleon waged war across the continent, and by 1814, a coalition of other European powers had defeated him. At the Congress of Vienna, the victors met to divide up these newly won territories, and the Department of the Forests was given to the Netherlands. But Britain had a problem. Would the Netherlands be able to defend this important fortress, so far from its centers of power? So the Congress of Vienna gave Luxembourg a strange political status. It would become a so-called Grand Duchy, an independent country, though it would be personally ruled over by King William of the Netherlands. This would allow it to function with autonomy, joining the German Confederation, a successor to the Holy Roman Empire, and allowing Prussian troops to control the fortress at Luxembourg City. But with King William of the Netherlands also acting as Grand Duke of Luxembourg, the two countries' fates would be closely intertwined. Throughout the 1800s, though, it would grow more and more independent. In the 1830s, revolution swept the southern Netherlands against King William's rule. Most of Luxembourg participated in the so-called Belgian Revolution, though the area around the Prussian-controlled fortress did not. Some two-thirds of the country joined the newly independent Belgium, where it's today known as the province of Luxembourg. Just the area closer to the castle would remain in King William's control. Prussian influence would be ousted after a political crisis in which they refused to accept a potential sale of the Grand Duchy to France. A treaty settling the controversy took Prussian troops out of the fortress, brought down its fortified city walls, withdrew it from membership in the German Confederation, and declared it to be a neutral country. The final step towards full independence came in 1890, when William III, King of the Netherlands and Grand Duke of Luxembourg, died without any sons. Succession laws in the Netherlands allowed women to take the throne. In Luxembourg, they did not. The Dutch throne went to William's daughter, rule of Luxembourg to his distant cousin. Luxembourg now had its own ruler. By the late 1800s, it had been industrializing rapidly. Iron ore had been discovered in the south, and steel companies were moving in. By 1913, the tiny country was home to 47 different blast furnaces. At the outset of World War I, Luxembourg had been transformed from a small, mostly rural agricultural country to an industrial powerhouse, one of the largest steel-producing nations in the world. Luxembourgish steel shipped by rail all across the continent. A tiny agricultural village, when iron ore was found nearby, Esch-sur-Alzette would transform into a steel-making center, exploding in population into the country's second-largest city. ArcelorMittal, a Luxembourgish steel giant, is today the second-largest steel company in the world. At the same time, with foreign travel made easier, many Luxembourgers were seeking out the possibility of a better life elsewhere. During these mass waves of European immigration, a third of the country's population moved overseas. Though they represented a small proportion of the millions who passed through Ellis Island, a fifth of the country's entire population emigrated to the United States, mostly to the Midwestern states of Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota. Large numbers also moved to neighboring countries like Germany and France. At the same time, the newly industrial nation was attractive to European migrants seeking work in its massive steel industry. Germans and Belgians, likewise, moved into their smaller neighbor, as did a large number of Italians. The Luxembourgish steel industry was largely manned by an immigrant workforce. The two world wars, of course, would prove one of the most devastating eras in the country's history. During the First World War, despite the Grand Duchy's proclaimed neutrality, Germany invaded and occupied their small neighbor. Luxembourgers found their country's leadership, much to their dismay, treading carefully with the German occupiers in a way that many viewed as collaboration. Much of Luxembourg's steel industry was managed by German corporations, and the larger power exercised serious economic influence in Luxembourg. On top of that, the Grand Duchess, Marie Adelaide, was from a German family herself. Was she being extra friendly to the occupying forces because she wanted them to win? Or did she just realize the futility of resisting the much larger occupying army? Either way, she grew incredibly unpopular. After the war and the retreat of the Germans following their defeat, a number of movements to abolish the monarchy altogether sprung up. Some of the Allied forces, seeing Luxembourg as a German collaborator, even proposed annexing it to Belgium. Eventually, this idea was put to rest, and in Luxembourg, the unpopular Grand Duchess abdicated the throne for her sister Charlotte. The terms of the treaty also left Germany economically weak. This was an issue for Luxembourg. Germany was where they exported most of their steel. To keep the steel industry alive, in 1922 they signed the Belgium-Luxembourg Economic Union, creating a common market with their western neighbor. It would be some time before the successes of this trade union would be visible, though, for an even larger war was on the horizon. While the royal family fled the country at the onslaught of the invading Germans, the occupying Nazi forces eventually annexed the country to the Third Reich. They declared that Luxembourgers were actually Germans, banned the speaking of French, and forced many to enlist. The Luxembourgish language, then less popular than French, had not been banned. Many Luxembourgers took to speaking it instead of the language of their occupiers. Many of Luxembourg's Jewish residents fled at the beginning of the invasion. Most who stayed were murdered in the Holocaust. At the same time, the royal family led a government in exile, speaking to many Luxembourgers via radio, while a resistance movement distributed anti-Nazi publication. In September of 1944, Allied forces liberated the country, but a German surprise advance through the Ardennes, the famed Battle of the Bulge, wreaked havoc on the north of Luxembourg. Allied forces, led by the Americans, fought back, and the enormous battle, waged across 3 different countries, would be the U.S.'s largest battle of the entire war. Allied victory at the Battle of the Bulge pushed the Nazis into a final retreat. It would be the last ever German offensive of World War II. After the war, the country, done with neutrality, signed on to some of the major post-war international organizations like NATO and the UN. During the war, its government in exile had signed on to an expanded version of their economic union. Now including the Netherlands, it was called Benelux. Luxembourg was at the forefront of post-war European cooperation. One such agreement was called the European Coal and Steel Community. Its founding members were the Benelux countries, Luxembourg, Belgium, and the Netherlands, as well as France, Italy, and West Germany. On its face, this was another economic union, creating a common market for some of the continent's most important coal and steel producers. But underlying it was a deeper motivation. Over the last half-century, Europe had been ravaged by war. Even before the World Wars, major conflicts had riled the continent. Many of these wars had seen Germany and France on opposing sides. But if these two countries had economies that were inextricably woven together, promoters of the coal and steel community argued, their interests would be one and the same, and war between the two would be a near impossibility. The headquarters of the coal and steel community, it was decided, would be in neutral ground, a place where both German and French was spoken, that sat between the two powers, and was a giant of the steel industry in its own right. Luxembourg was a perfect choice. Assemblies with representatives from each of the member states were organized to determine the laws needed to govern these two industries across these 6 different countries. In 1957, it was enlarged into a larger economic union called the European Economic Community. As more countries signed on to this common market and Europe continued to deepen the integration of the continent through more treaties, Luxembourg remained a central player. On top of a common market, in 1985, representatives of Luxembourg, Belgium, West Germany, France, and the Netherlands met in the Moselle town of Schengen and signed an agreement setting in motion the abolition of border checks between their 5 countries and implementing a common visa. This Schengen agreement was revolutionary, and since then 24 other European countries have joined this so-called Schengen area. In 1993, these various agreements, many of which had their roots in Luxembourg, were organized within a new formal body called the European Union. The EU would bring about further European integration with a common currency and some elements of common governance. The old headquarters of the European Coal and Steel Community, Luxembourg City, was picked to be the location of a number of different major EU institutions. The European Court of Justice, General Secretariat of the European Parliament, and several other elements of the EU government are all located in Luxembourg City. This makes it, after Brussels, the Union's de facto capital, one of the EU's 3 secondary capitals, alongside Frankfurt, Germany, and Strasbourg, France. With the economic benefits of European integration coupled with a powerful steel sector, Luxembourg modernized rapidly. But in the 1970s, as was the case in other parts of Europe and the United States, the steel industry went into decline. But a decade prior, another sector had been growing rapidly: finance. Earlier in the century, the country had implemented tax laws that were particularly favorable for banks, big businesses, and the wealthy. Foreign banks moved into Luxembourg to take advantage of these limited regulations, and a powerful financial sector had grown, transforming it into one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. Today, it depends on the ranking used, but it usually comes in with the world's 3rd or 4th highest GDP per capita, after Monaco, Liechtenstein, and sometimes Singapore. Throughout this rapid century of transformation, Luxembourg City grew from what had been a fairly small town to a far larger, more urbanized city, first a steel center, then an EU capital, and then a major financial hub. As the city physically expanded, immigrants moved in to work the jobs that fueled this transformation, particularly in construction and in service jobs. The largest influx came from Portugal, which suffered under dictatorship until the 1970s. Today, immigrants make up just under half of Luxembourg's population, one of the largest proportions in the world. In such a small but economically vibrant country, Luxembourg is a major hub for international commutes. The Schengen area opened up the possibility for Europeans across the continent to live in one country while working in another, and 37% of these cross-border commutes within the EU occur within the Benelux countries. Some 35,000 Belgians cross into Luxembourg to go to work every day. About 1,000 Luxembourgers do the reverse. The city is transformed into a major regional center, both within the country and for the Belgian, German, and French regions adjacent to it, and today is the fastest growing country in all of Europe, increasing its population by about 1.5% annually, while most European nations are growing at less than 1%, if not shrinking outright. My brother and I visited Luxembourg City 2 summers ago. We took the train in from Germany and explored the city by foot. The physical geography of the city was among the most impressive I've seen. The winding route of the Alzette and a tributary, the Petrus, carved canyons and ravines through the city, leaving some parts of the city perched atop cliffs, others down on the canyon floor. This has given Luxembourg City very distinct neighborhoods. The center of the city is called the Ville Haute, French for high city, and as you might imagine, sits above the canyon. To the south, east, and north, it is completely surrounded by canyons and valleys, connected to the other neighborhoods of the city by a few bridges, including the beautiful Pont Adolphe. To the west, the city's arc-shaped municipal park separates it from the other neighborhoods on the plateau, leaving the city center completely surrounded by greenery. The Ville Haute is mostly home to low-rise towers and historic buildings following its narrow cobbled lanes. The city's architecture is fairly uniform. Most of the buildings in the older parts of the city are colored in light shades of white, gray, beige, yellow, and pink, with triangular dark gray rooftops. 2 public squares, the Place Guillaume II and Place d'Armes, sit near old cathedrals, the Palace of the Grand Duke, and the Chamber of Deputies, Luxembourg's Parliament House. The Bock, the rock atop which Count Siegfried built the first castle of Luxembourg, juts out spectacularly over the canyons of the Alzette, as do a number of viewpoints built onto clifftop outcroppings. Pretty much anywhere you go in the city, you can be afforded a spectacular view. Inside the valleys, you feel like you're not in a city at all. Wooded parks and beautiful terrace gardens and farms line the canyon floors, as do neighborhoods like Pfaffendahl and Groen, which feel like their own little riverside villages, very different from the city up above. Kirchbiersch, a plateau on the other side of the Alzette from the Ville Haute, was a fairly undeveloped area when it was picked to be the site of a number of major European institutions. Today, one of the unofficial capitals of the EU, tall modern towers and skyscrapers house important European government bodies like the Court of Justice. A tower in the Court of Justice complex is the tallest building in the country. This is a town of business and government. More so than tourists with cameras, you see people in suits with briefcases, bureaucrats and bankers commuting into the city every morning. With the city's different levels and physically divided neighborhoods, this small city has some of the best and most impressive public transit and pedestrian infrastructure I've seen. Trains are free, fast, and regular, and they've constructed creative ways to get people up and down the cliffsides, from funicular inclines to sky bridges that jut out over the canyon and then allow pedestrians to descend down an isolated elevator tower. It's a beautiful and fascinating city, and a place I would love to go back to. Traditional Luxembourgish foods include fried potato cakes, small spicy sausages, fried fish from the Moselle, and a green bean potato and sausage soup. Crémant, a sparkling Moselle wine, is a classic Luxembourgish drink. Of course, there's a lot of foreign food available here from neighbors like Germany, Belgium, and France, as well as Portugal, which has a large immigrant community in the country. Immigrants make up just under half of Luxembourg's entire population, around 47%. While Luxembourg doesn't collect statistics on ethnicity, the Migration Policy Institute estimates that the remaining 53% are almost entirely ethnic Luxembourgers, tracing their ancestry to the country, while about 14% are Portuguese, 8% are French, and 4% are Italian. One of the most fascinating elements of life in Luxembourg is that the country is trilingual. Luxembourgish is its national language, and the most commonly spoken one at home, but French has a wider reach as a second language and is often used in day-to-day communication, especially by people who speak different native languages. German, meanwhile, is also widely understood and is the main language of the Grand Duchy's media. These are the country's 3 official languages, but there is really a 4th one. Most Luxembourgers can also speak English, and it's become the language of business, finance, and work in EU institutions, often done by international bureaucrats, diplomats, and elected officials from all across Europe. On top of that, with a large Portuguese community, about 15% of the population speaks Portuguese at home. Religiously, about 53% of Luxembourg is Christian, the vast majority of whom, some 87% of Luxembourgish Christians, are Catholic. Catholicism is deeply rooted in the country. Of those who aren't Christian, most are non-religious. With one of the highest GDPs per capita on the planet, Luxembourgers live in one of the wealthiest nations in the world, bolstered by a major financial industry. Formerly a steel-making giant, it is today mostly finance, as well as the presence of the EU government, that drives the Luxembourgish economy. Major corporations include ArcelorMittal, the second largest steel company in the world, Tenaris, Eurofin Scientific, Millicom, and CPI Property Group. Additionally, a number of huge foreign companies have set up shop in the country and have a major presence there in order to take advantage of its tax laws, including Amazon, DuPont, and Pfizer. Their largest newspaper, Luxembourg Report, is published in German and headquartered in Luxembourg City. The largest media company in the country overall is RTL, a broadcasting company. Though headquartered in Germany, it began in Luxembourg and remains popular there. After all, it stands for Radio Television Luxembourg. The country has one public university, the University of Luxembourg, located in Esch-sur-Alzette. Football or soccer is popular in the country, and one team, F91 Tiedeling, has reached the group stage of the UEFA Europa League. They have a national team, though it has never qualified for the World Cup. The country has a representative parliamentary democracy, led by a prime minister. It's also a constitutional monarchy and the only Grand Duchy in the world. Though mostly ceremonial, the Grand Duke or Duchess does represent the country on the international stage and is a major symbol of the nation. Luxembourg's Grand Duke is Henri, and their Prime Minister, Luc Frieden, leads the Christian Social People's Party, a center-right pro-EU party. Former Luxembourgish Prime Minister Jean-Claude Juncker was elected President of the European Commission, the chief executive of the European Union, in 2013 and served as president through 2019. He was the EU's most recent president other than current president Ursula von der Leyen. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check out my other videos in The Nation Explained on Ukraine, Greenland, and Iceland. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, that is interesting.